Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Wednesday, December 3rd, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that particular chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 21 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download from that page a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one, in which people have been stepped through the worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words HeartLand Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that, before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment from you through email, we'll address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. And we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service. And that's just so much easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. The other option is, if you're available, you can join us live. We're on Zoom from 11 to noon Central Time, most weekdays. And if you go to zoom.us and tell it you want to join a meeting, just enter meeting ID 853. I'm doing this by memory until it comes up on my phone here. 2357-4173. We're getting close. I almost had the whole thing. 853-2357-4173. And if you join through the phone, you'll be muted automatically when you get signed in, and you can unmute by hitting *6 on your phone and toggle in and out of mute by hitting *6. And as I mentioned, we're greatly appreciate whenever anybody chooses to share with us, join us live, or send us an email, because it makes it so much easier for us to live into our intention with this work if we know how it's landing for you. So I I had a couple thoughts to share this morning as I was working with somebody, actually just talking with somebody. I heard myself saying, in response to this, the idea is most of us want to get things right, and we want to think we're right, and we want to know the truth, and we want to preach the truth, and we want to be seen as people who are all of that stuff. And it just came to me that what I ended up saying was, we all have to walk on the tightrope between moving ourselves forward in healing and showing the world how brilliant we are. Now, just try and let that sink in, because when I heard myself say it, I just stopped what I was doing and picked up the phone to make a note about it. There's something really gripping in there. If I want to know, if I want to be seen as somebody who knows, if I want to fight for, I've got the truth or what I'm right, and so I'm so smart, I cannot be healing what needs to heal within me. If I am identified with or attached to or aligned with an identity, any kind of a thought-based identity, I cannot heal fully. And as soon as I typed that out, I remembered the Guy Finley story where he says, we're the kind of people as human beings who can be on the bathroom floor in a puddle of our own tears, overwhelmed with all of the issues in our lives, and the phone rings and we pick it up and it's somebody we know who's in trouble or has some issue, and all of a sudden we become the expert on how to thrive in this life. And then we hang up the phone and we go back to our puddle of tears. We do not let people know the things we struggle with for the most part. And we're more invested in being seen as helper, and we're expert at giving advice, but we're not so expert at recognizing that the advice we give is perfect for us, and maybe only good for somebody else. So, there was another article. I don't remember if I read this one, about a 1951 female mystery writer who used a detective novel to challenge 500 years of historical fact, and that had to do with, an English king. Does anybody remember? Have I read that article before about King Richard III? Well, anyway, a female mystery writer decided to do research on what's the real story of King Richard III, who was accused of being a horrible monster who killed his nephews. But that was a story that had been promoted by people decades after King Richard's death in battle. And because he died bravely in battle, they had to create some kind of a lie about how he was a traitor and a coward, and that he, was shot in the back or whatever, running from the fight or whatever.
Tim, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You just blinked out and froze. Now you're moving again, so I'll mute and you can continue, but we missed some things that you said, or at least I did. You can ask others.
Do you remember me reading this article about the female novelist who cracked the mystery of King Richard III?
Yeah, that's about where you had blinked out, so I got it. You can carry on.
But on past shows, do you remember me reading the article?
I don't remember, but if you started out, I recognize it.
Well, I've given big chunks of it already, but what happened was she wrote a novel about a detective, a fictional detective, who was laid up in the hospital and started sending out interns or whatever to do research, and eventually turned up enough evidence to get people to question what's the real truth about King Richard III? And then eventually they unearthed his bones, and it validated her position and
Wow.
overturned centuries of people believing some party line that had been created. It's like, the spin machine was active in human communications hundreds of years ago. People making up stories and lies, or spinning the evidence to shine in a direction that it doesn't really support. So anyway, that's just another thing about there are so many examples of how women are not valued even when they're right and they've done all the research. But the powers that be, the good old boy network in academia, etc., makes it very difficult for even brilliant minds to be heard if they happen to be in a female body. So anyway, I'm hopeful that this is at least resonating with some people enough for them to take a look at their own issues. I just got off the phone with in a session with a person who was saying, I must be doing something wrong because X, Y, or Z. And I pointed out to her, I interrupted her and said, that's one of the common phrases. You probably said it 7 times already in this 1 hour. And it's false because it's negative. We know it's false because it's negative. And it's reductionistic and simplistic, the kinds of things that she's using to maybe point out the fact that she's a problem, or she's got a problem, or she's done things wrong. It's just neutral data points. It's about what other people have chosen to do with their own lives, and it's got nothing to do with her. But in the way we're raised, there's a term, egocentric, which means I tend to be almost completely absorbed with my own sense of self-awareness and what I like and what my family thinks is the truth and what my culture taught me. That's egocentrism. That's this idea that if it's familiar to me, it must be right and true and strong and good. And if it's not familiar to me, it might be a threat, so maybe I'll just put on all my war gear before I even encounter it or look at it or let anybody share it with me. Or maybe I'll just discount it out of hand before I even take a look at it.
Tim?
Yes.
I have a friend who constantly apologizes, blames herself and apologizes. Just chiming in with an example. She says, it's Sarah Thayer. Do you remember Sarah? Yeah, a woman in our choir. Even if somebody else did something wrong, she'll say, oh, maybe it was me, I'm sorry.
Unbelievable. It's so strong in some people, that
I know.
pattern.
It is. So I bet other people can think of things too. But anyway, I'm going to mute again. It's just, you're on a burning, important topic.
All right. Well, I'm gonna leave that hanging there in case somebody else wants to mention it. What I had decided to do for today was put out a couple of those things that had come up earlier this morning, and then introduce the Mindshifters Radio to Krishnamurti. J. Krishnamurti. The J stands for Judo. Juddo. And when I was at a crisis point in my second year of grad school and realized I needed some therapy for my own mental health, I went and started Jungian analysis with Dr. Joseph Pasek, P-A-S-I-C. I'm sure he's no longer in the body. And in the very early part of that therapy, he assigned me the reading of the book Commentaries on Living, Series 1, 2, and 3, by J. Krishnamurti. And I went over to the only place in the Chicagoland area that I might be able to find it. And sure enough, they had one of those books there, but they only had the second series. They didn't have the first and the third. So I got the second series and I read it, and probably read through it as many times as the Way of Mastery years later. So here's the intro and some what do you call it when people recommend your book? Some reviews. Here's what it says. In this series of commentaries, J. Krishnamurti, who is one of the great thinkers of our time, he touches upon many human problems, our hopes, our fears, our illusions, our beliefs, our prejudices, and he does so in the simplest language, in a way that seems to pierce to their roots. Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote, "The sheer simplicity is breathtaking. The reader is given, in one paragraph, often in one sentence, enough to keep him or her exploring, questioning, and thinking for days." The Times Literary Supplement. This is a book I think that was published in 1959. The Times Literary Supplement from London says, "The insight, spiritual and poetic, of these commentaries is as simply expressed as it is searing in its demand." And then Francis Hackett from the New Republic wrote, "Krishnamurti is no other than he seems, a free man, one of the first quality, growing older as diamonds do, but the gem-like flame not dating, and alive in these commentaries. It is a treasure." And then the foreword. J. Krishnamurti was born in South India and educated in England. He's been hailed by many from early youth as a spiritual teacher. He rejected adulation and leadership in order to encourage spiritual freedom and understanding. He devoted his life to speaking and counseling, traveling in the United States of America, Europe, India, and other parts of the world, addressing thousands of people, always pointing the way to individual discovery of truth. 1956, it was copywritten and published. Now, other reading I did about these commentaries let me know that what you're going to be hearing is the transcripts of conversations that Krishnamurti would have with people who would come to him seeking counsel. And often the individual section that's being presented has a preface of a poetic style of writing or description that was written by one of Krishnamurti's companions and editors of the book, if I remember that correctly. The first section is titled Creative Happiness. There is a city by the magnificent river, wide and long, and there are steps that lead down to the water's edge, and the world seems to live on those steps. From early morning till well after dark, they are always crowded and noisy. Almost level with the water are little projecting steps on which people sit and are lost in their hopes and longings, in their gods and their chants. The temple bells are ringing, the muezzin is calling, someone is singing, and a huge crowd has gathered, listening in appreciative silence. Beyond all this, round the bend and higher up the river, there is a pile of buildings with their avenues of trees and wide roads. They stretch several miles inland and along the river, through a narrow, dirty lane, one enters into this scattered field of learning. So many students from all over the country are there, eager, active, and noisy. The teachers are pompous, intriguing for better positions and salaries. No one seems to be greatly concerned with what happens to the students after they leave. The teachers impart certain knowledge and techniques which the clever ones quickly absorb, and when they graduate, that is it. The teachers have assured jobs, they have families and security. However, when the students leave, they have to face the turmoil and the insecurity of life. There are such buildings, such teachers and students all over the land. Some students achieve fame and position in the world. Others breed, struggle, and die. The state wants competent technicians, administrators to guide and to rule. And there's always the army, and then the church, and then the businesses. All the world over, it is the same. It is to learn a technique and to have a job, a profession, etc., that we go through this process of having the upper mind stuffed with facts and knowledge, is it not? Obviously, in the modern world, a good technician has a better chance of earning a livelihood. But then what? Is the one who is a technician better able to face the complex problem of living than the one who is not? A profession is only a small part of your life, but there are also those parts which are hidden, subtle, and mysterious. To emphasize the one and to deny or neglect the rest must inevitably lead to very lopsided and disintegrated activity. Disintegrating activity. This is precisely what is taking place in the world today, with ever-mounting conflict, confusion, and misery. Please remember, this was published in 1956, so these words may have been spoken a decade or two even before that. In 1956, this is precisely what's happening in the world today. If we emphasize one part of our lives and deny or neglect the rest, we inevitably lead ourselves into a very lopsided and disintegrating pattern of activity. In today's world, with ever-mounting conflict, confusion, and misery, that's what's happening. Of course, there are a few exceptions, the creative, the happy, those who are in touch with something that is not man-made, who are not dependent on the things of the mind. You and I have intrinsically, we have the capacity to be happy, to be creative, to be in touch with something that is beyond the clutches of time. Creative happiness is not a gift reserved for the few. And why is it that the vast majority do not know about that happiness? Why do some seem to keep in touch with the profound in spite of circumstances and accidents, while others are destroyed by them? Why are some people seemingly resilient, pliable, flexible, while others remain unyielding, rigid, and are destroyed? In spite of knowledge, some keep the door open to that which no person and no book can offer. In spite of knowledge. What's he talking about here in terms of knowledge? Facts. A fund of knowledge, like anybody who goes through first grade to eighth grade or first grade through high school in this country, over the course of those 12 years, they will gain, if they're the average student, trying to learn, they'll gain a tremendous amount in their basic fund of knowledge. They may not gain so much in terms of how to learn or learning how to think and how to trust their intuition and how to tap into wisdom, but they do gain knowledge as fact, as facts, as factoids, as the content of books. And in spite of gaining all of that, which tends to be the mechanism by which most people shut down every other aspect of their life, in spite of that knowledge, some people keep the door open to insight, intuition, inspiration, creativity, their connection to their source, while others seem smothered by technique and authority. Why does this happen? It's fairly clear to the mind that the mind itself wants to be caught and made certain in some kind of activity, disregarding wider and deeper issues. For in that moment, when the mind is given something to do that it can wrap itself around and feel like it's a master of, it is then on safer ground. So it is education, its exercises, and its activities are encouraged and sustained on that level. And we create excuses for not going beyond that. Before they are contaminated by what we call education, many children are in touch with the unknown. They show this in so many ways. However, the environment soon begins to close in around them. And after a certain age, they lose that light, that beauty, which is not found in any book or any school. Why? Why do they lose that? Do not say that life is too much for them, that they have to face hard realities, that it is their karma, that it is their father's sin. This is all nonsense. Creative happiness is for all, and not for the few alone. You may express it one way, and I may express it in another, and yet it is for all. Creative happiness has no value on the market. It is not a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder, but it is the one thing that can be for all. Is this creative happiness something that can be realized? That is, can the mind keep in touch with that which is the source of all happiness? Can this openness be sustained in spite of knowledge and technique? In spite of education? Paul Simon wrote a song, the song's titled Kodachrome, and the lyrics are, "When I look back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all." Krishnamurti here is asking this question. Can I stay open? Can I maintain my connection to a source which can teach me of wisdom and higher things, even as I stuff my mind full of data points? His answer is, it can be, but only when the educator is educated to this reality. Only when he who teaches is himself in touch with the source of creative happiness. So our problem is not the pupil, it's not the child. The problem is the teacher and the parent. Education is a vicious circle only when we do not see the importance and the essential necessity above all else of this supreme happiness. After all, to be open to the source of all happiness is the highest religion. And to realize this happiness, you must give right attention to it, just as you do to your businesses. The teacher's profession is not a mere routine job, but it is the expression of beauty and joy, which cannot be measured in terms of achievement and success. The light of reality and its bliss are destroyed when the mind, which is the seat of self, assumes control. Self-knowledge is the beginning of wisdom. Without self-knowledge, learning leads to ignorance, strife, and sorrow. I just got the image of one of those warehouses from the Indiana Jones movies. At the end of the warehouse, they've got, a seemingly endless government warehouse with boxes and crates and of all various sizes and shapes stacked as far as the eye can see. And there are these forklifts driving up and down the aisles, and there's a lot of stuff there, but it's been organized, right? And it's kept in its place. And the image that came to me was what we do with our children in our education system is we take basically the same kind of space and we start cramming boxes in it without any aisles, without any forklifts to organize it, without any sense of relative importance. We just shove it full of trivialities, as the Way of Mastery would label it. And imagine how unproductive it would be to try and go find something in a warehouse where everything had just been crammed in there for years with no master key about where things are being placed, or no structured format for, identifying what is in what crate and what position an individual crate is in. It would be disastrous. It would be completely useless. You would probably have better results just burning the whole thing down and starting from scratch. Think about the mind of a child with its unknown capacity for learning and integrating and exploring and creativity and joy and aliveness. And then we start trimming the neurons in that brain, and we start punishing it for this and rewarding it for that, and we're doing that in what we think is, our best attempt to be loving and in our best interest of the child, because that's what we've been taught to do. But here Krishnamurti is bringing into the question, is the whole system self-perpetuating all the misery that the system says it wants to get rid of? The next section here is titled Conditioning. And the way I used to use this book was I would read one or two of these sections a day maximum if it was a really short section. This one's a pretty long one, so this will probably be our last bit of reading out of the book for today, but it's titled Conditioning. And it reads, "He was very concerned with helping humanity and doing good works. He was active in various social welfare organizations. He said he had literally never taken a long holiday, and that since his graduation from college, he had worked constantly for the betterment of man. Of course, he wasn't taking any money for the work he was doing. His work had always been very important to him, and he was greatly attached to what he did. He had become a first-class social worker, and he loved it. However, he'd heard something in one of the talks about the various kinds of escape which condition the mind, and he wanted to talk things over. The question is, do you think being a social worker is conditioning? Does it only bring about further conflict? Well, let us find out what we mean by conditioning. When we are aware that we are conditioned, what's happening? How can we be aware that we are conditioned? Are we ever truly aware of it? Are we aware of it at the depths at which it can happen? Are you aware that you are conditioned? Or are you only aware of conflict, of struggle at various levels of your being? Surely, we are aware not of our conditioning, but only of conflict, of pain and pleasure. The question comes, what do you mean by conflict? Krishnamurti responds, every kind of conflict. The conflict between nations, between various so-called social groups, between individuals, and, as Susan Fluak might point out to Susan Bingham one day in the near past, conflict within oneself. Every kind of conflict. Krishnamurti, in his teachings, was the person, I've said this before, who was the most clear, the most steadfast, the most relentless in the pursuit of the core observations that he begins with. So, every kind of conflict between nations, social groups, individuals, and even within the individual. He goes on, is not conflict inevitable as long as there is no integration between the actor and his action, between challenge and response? Conflict is our problem, is it not? Not any one particular conflict, but all conflict. The struggle between ideas, beliefs, ideologies, between what we perceive as the opposites. If there were no conflict, there would be no problems. The man asks, are you suggesting that we should all seek a life of isolation and contemplation? Krishnamurti responds, contemplation is arduous. It is one of the most difficult things to understand. Isolation, though each one is consciously or unconsciously seeking it in his own way, does not solve our problems. On the contrary, it increases them. We here are trying to understand what are the factors of conditioning which bring about further conflict. We're only aware of conflict, of pain, of pleasure. We're not aware of our conditioning. What makes for conditioning? Social or environmental influences, the society in which we were born, the culture in which we've been raised, economic and political pressures, and so on. But is that all? These influences are our own product, are they not? Society is the outcome of man's relationship with man. This is fairly obvious. This relationship is one of use, of need, of comfort, of gratification. And it creates influences, values that bind us. The binding is our conditioning. By our own thoughts and actions, we are bound. But we're not aware that we are bound. We're only aware of the conflict of pain and pleasure. We never seem to go beyond this, and if we do, it's only into further conflict. We are not aware of our conditioning. And until we are, we can only produce further conflict and confusion. The question comes, how is one to be aware of one's conditioning? Krishnamurti responds, it's possible only by understanding another process, the process of attachment. If we can understand why we are attached, then perhaps we can be aware of our conditioning. And then the man asks, isn't that a rather long way around to come to a direct question? Krishnamurti responds, is it? Just try to be aware of your conditioning. you can only know it indirectly in relation to something else. You cannot be aware of your conditioning as an abstraction, for then it's merely verbal without much significance. We are only aware of conflict. Conflict exists when there is no integration between challenge and response. This conflict is the result of your conditioning. Conditioning is attachment. Attachment to work, to tradition, to property, to people, to ideas, and so on. If there were no attachment, would there be conditioning? Of course not. So then we must ask, why are we attached? I'm attached to my country because through identification with it, I become somebody. I identify myself with my work, and the work becomes important. I am my family, my property. I am attached to them. The object of attachment offers me the means of escape from my own emptiness. Therefore, attachment is escape. And it is escape that strengthens conditioning. If I am attached to you, it is because you have become the means I use to escape from myself. Therefore, you're very important to me, and I must possess you and hold on to you. You become the conditioning factor, and escape is the conditioning. If we can be aware of our escapes, we can then perceive the factors, the influences that make for conditioning. Then the man asks, well, am I escaping from myself through social work? Krishnamurti responds, are you attached to it? Bound to it? Would you feel lost, empty, bored if you didn't do the social work? The man replies, I'm sure I would. Krishnamurti says, attachment to your work, then, is your escape. There are escapes at all of the levels of our being. You escape through work, another might escape through drink, another through religious ceremonies, another through knowledge, another through God, and still another is addicted to amusement. All escapes are the same. There is no superior or inferior escape. God and drink are on the same level as long as they are escapes from what we are. When we are aware of our escapes, only then can we know our conditioning. The man asks, what shall I do if I cease to escape through social work? Can I do anything without escaping? Is not all my action a form of escape from what I am? Krishnamurti responds, and this is key, he does this in a lot of his different talks. He responds by asking the person to slow down and pay attention to what they're actually asking. Is this question of yours merely verbal? Or does it reflect an actuality, a fact which you are experiencing in the moment? Have you had an insight, an inspiration, an intuition come to you? Or are you just saying words to try and line up the words so you sound right, and the person you're talking to either acknowledges you're right or you prove them wrong? It's what Krishnamurti does in almost every discussion I've seen him have with people. What's the purpose of your question? Is it merely verbal? Or are you making a statement about a realization you've had? So Krishnamurti says, is this question merely verbal, or does it reflect an actuality? Does it reflect a fact which you are currently experiencing? If you did not escape, what would happen? Just sit with that idea. Have you ever tried it? Just begin by just imagining not waking up tomorrow without that sense of identity and what arises in you. The man responds by saying, "What you are saying is so negative, if I may say so, you don't offer any substitute for work." Krishnamurti goes on and says, "Is not all substitution just another form of escape? When one particular form of activity is not satisfactory, or if it brings further conflict, then we turn to another. To replace one activity by another without understanding escape is rather futile, is it not? It is these escapes and our attachment to them that make for conditioning. Conditioning brings problems. It brings conflict. It is conditioning that prevents our understanding of the challenge. Being conditioned, our response must inevitably create conflict." You know, one of the things that Krishnamurti brings into the Western mind so clearly is the idea that your thoughts are not the thing you're thinking about. Your thoughts about yourself are not who you really are. Your thoughts about another person are not the truth of that person. Your thoughts about the importance of a thing in your life are not the actual value of that thing in your life. It's just your thoughts about it. So when we're living primarily from our thought, and we're trying to wait until we've got it figured out at that higher level, upper level, thought level of our mind, before we take an action, we are living from the past. Dr. Michael Ryce talks about this in a number of his different talks. All thought, all formulated thought with words and sentences and the ability to be verbal is from the past. The present moment life experience doesn't have language or words attached to it unless there's a human mind around to layer it between the direct experience of life and the person. So the question becomes, how can one be free from conditioning? Krishnamurti answers by saying, only by understanding, being aware of our escapes. Our attachment to a person, to work, to an ideology is the conditioning factor. This is the thing we have to understand and not seek a better or more intelligent escape. Let that sink in. Our attachment to a person, to a work, to an ideology, my attachment to the Reality Management Worksheet or Michael Ryce and the work or the support groups is a problem. And it creates a conditioning which creates conflict. Our attachment, whether it's to a person, to work, to an ideology, is the conditioning factor. This is the thing we have to understand. And as we understand it, resist the urge to seek a better or more intelligent form of escape. In truth, all escapes are unintelligent, as they inevitably bring about conflict. To cultivate detachment is another form of escape, of isolation. It is attachment to an abstraction. So if we try to cultivate detachment, we're again in a thought process. We're again going to label and describe and control or contain this thing we call attachment, and we're going to call that process detachment. But it's just another form of escape and isolation. It is attachment to an abstraction, to an ideal called detachment. The ideal is fictitious. It was made up by the ego. And becoming the ideal, and working on becoming the ideal, is an escape from just being with what is. There is the understanding of what is, and adequate action towards what is can only happen when the mind is no longer seeking escape. The very thinking about what is an escape from what is. Thinking about the problem is escape from the problem. Because thinking is the problem, and the only problem. The mind, unwilling to be what it is, the mind that is fearful of what it is, seeks these various escapes. And the way of escape is thought. As long as there is thinking, there must be escapes, attachments, and these only strengthen the conditioning. Freedom from conditioning comes with the freedom from thinking. Here's Dr. Michael Ryce saying, if you want to heal, you've got to be out of your mind. Here's Dr. Michael Ryce saying, you know what, these days I spend 2 or 3 hours every morning just breathing, not trying to think a certain thought or work out the answer to a problem, just putting myself in that open space and inviting insight, intuition, inspiration, etc. Freedom from conditioning comes with the freedom from thinking. When the mind is utterly still, only then is there freedom for the real to be. When the mind is utterly still. And of course, you cannot still or quiet your mind. At least within this body of work and teaching, people like Guy Finley will tell you, look, and J.M. from the Way of Mastery, if you decide you want to dismantle your ego, who is it that you think is deciding to dismantle the ego? The ego will never dismantle itself. It's ego that says, oh, my ego is so big, or my ego is so small, or I can dismantle my ego. Or it's all just thought about thought about thought. Your essence is not the thoughts you have about yourself. So this freedom from conditioning only comes when the mind is quiet, when it is still, utterly still are the words he uses here. And Guy Finley has a line about this. He says, the mind will only stop doing what it's doing, only stops doing what it automatically does, the churning that he calls the mechanical level of mind, what Michael Ryce calls the 9-bit mind. The churning is going to continue not until somebody yells at the mind, not until you decide to stop it, not because you deciding to stop it is the churning of your mind. It's going to continue to churn and do what it's always done until it wakes up and realizes that it and what it's doing is not the solution to your pain, it is the source of your pain. And that quote from Guy Finley is one of the quotes that let me start questioning, I wonder if Guy Finley knows about Krishnamurti, because that's the essence of one of the best core teachings from Krishnamurti. You will not quiet your mind. And yet, when the mind is utterly still, right, when the mind quits doing what it does, and it can't be forced into that, the only way that happens is when the mind wakes up and realizes that everything it's been trying to do to be a solution to its pain is the thing that's sourcing the pain. It's creating the pain. And when the mind realizes that, it's dumbstruck. It's in shock and awe. And then it's utterly still. And in that moment, in that little window, you might say, there's a space for newness, for insight, intuition, creativity, for a blast of the truth of life without words and labels to come flooding in and instruct us, teach us about ourselves, and teach us about life itself. That is where we'll end today. I managed to get through that segment titled Conditioning. So I thank you all for being here. I don't know if I said enough at the beginning, but we encourage people to comment, unmute, question, raise a hand, etc. Even if I seem to be in the middle of reading something or on a roll. And we're down here to our last minute or so, so I'll remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. And I'll remind us that I observed recently that every single time things did not work out the way I thought they should, they always worked out far better than I ever thought they could. Blessings.